We Get Outdoors Nation. Today I thought we had a Lord, and actually we have Will Lord. Will Lord is a prehistoric survival expert. Before we hit record, he was just telling me about an epic motorbike journey back into the past that he's completed dodging lockdowns this year. And if you ever watch the TV, you may even see him with Ed Stafford at some point in time. Will, it's a great pleasure to have you on the We Get Outdoors podcast.
Thanks very much for having me along. It'll be a pleasure to tell you this story.
Oh, I can't wait to hear it. Will, what is it that the world should know about you?
Well, I'm known as a sort of like modern prehistoric caveman in the 21st century. And that basically means that I've asked myself a set of questions about what it would have been like to survive and thrive thousands of years ago. And I had the honour, let's call it an honour, of growing up on a Neolithic flint mine from the ages of 5 until I was 18. So my childhood upbringing was in not just an ancient flint mine, but in the middle of Thetford Forest. So Thetford Forest is quite a large area, and that was my playground. So I was out there den building, I was out there hunting, fishing, and just being part of that landscape. And alongside that, I had a dad who took me fishing, and we would go out with pretty much the air gun, get rabbits, and there was mushrooms. So there was quite a complexity of nature that was let into my life. And that was wonderful. That was a wonderful start. And when I hit the age of 17, my family decided that they were going to be moving on from Grimesgraves because my dad had actually forged a kind of, there was an opening in the market for flint that was going to be used for building construction because no one was out there supplying it. And so my dad went on to do this for a living, and I was a car mechanic at the time. Let's just turn this phone down, you know. It's like mobile phone pinging in the background. So I was a car mechanic at the time, but there was an interesting rift that happened for me. So we moved from nature into a town, and I was of an age where I was adaptable, but I started careers doing more modern day things. But what began to gently happen was people like putting country shows on and stuff like that were contacting me and saying, you know, would you like to come to the show and demonstrate your skills? So like, back in the day, I'd put a sheepskin over my head and sit there and nap something out of flint. And that's how I got along for a while. But then a few people started asking me if I'd teach them certain things. And this could be bow making, tanning, firelighting, and flint napping. And so I began to run some little courses and eventually created a website, and it got so busy that then, 20 years ago now, I knew that I couldn't hold down a normal job anymore because my own little business was becoming a success. So I began it, and but all through that time, you know, it wasn't just about flint napping and the period of Neolithic man, because that's quite a narrow subject base all by itself. We go back a lot further than that. You know, we go back through the Mesolithic, and then we go back into something called the Paleolithic, and that has 3 periods in the Paleolithic: the upper, middle, and the lower Paleolithic. And then what you get on top of that is you get all of the different types of species of mankind, and you start getting into the whole journey out of Africa and the splendid journey of mankind's survival strategy and harmony within living on this planet. And I started to ask myself a big variety of questions, because it's all very well running a course on flint knapping, but there's so many more elements to what it takes to be able to understand yourself in nature. So I was on a show one day. I was at something called the Wilderness Gathering, and one of the things I used to do is I used to put on a comedy show along with the person who worked with me. So basically what we did was we did an actual live timeline. So we would walk through 2 million years of mankind, lighting fires, making tools, basically abusing each other, but showing people where things were discovered in time and how it all fits into the story. And on this, but he, bless his heart, he had a bit of trouble keeping up with me, because I never liked telling the same story quite the same twice. So he had to kind of stay awake, so that along the journey, we were presenting something that nobody could really they didn't know was going to happen. So it was exciting. And on this particular occasion, I said to him, I said, I've just had some thoughts about how this is going to work out. What's going to happen is me and you are going to be sitting around a fire, and I'm going to tell you about a dream that I had. And in that dream, I've gone into the future, and mankind has lost the skills of being able to survive in the wilderness. And so we started the show, and I explained to him about this dream, and he said, no, he said, I don't believe that's possible. And in fact, what we'll do is we'll find out. And when we turned and viewed the crowd, and I said, right, call somebody over. I said, you can come over here. I said, let's have a quick look let's have a look in your hands and find out what skill sets you've got. And this particular person, I selected them because I knew they were a bushcraft instructor. And I said, I would like to know whether or not you are capable of lighting a fire in the wild. And the answer was yes. And I said, are you capable of making a shelter in the wild? And the answer was yes. And I said, are you capable of trapping your food out in the wilderness? And the answer was yes. And I went on asking him a group of questions, and we went into territories like basket making, clay technology, tanning, effective butchery. We went into the concepts of being able to forage and understanding where you were going to find not only food but medicine in nature, where you was going to find your glues, how you could filter water. So basically, I brought in this comprehension, and for the best of him, in many times he was able to actually honestly answer, yes, he could do all these things, right? And I said, that's wonderful. I said, on account of that, I said, let's tip the seeds of hope into this little girl's hands. And it was kind of magical, because we picked this little girl, she was sitting there on the floor, and we went to open her hand, and it was tightly clenched. And as we opened her fingers, her hand had a bundle of natural cordage that she'd been taught to make that day. And it was like the seed was already in her hand. And it was a magical experience. But what that went on to percolate back into me was I come up with this theory, and I called it the 30 rings of self-sufficiency. And when you look at your hands, which are quite important in all of this because it's crafting, each digit, like every point of articulation on the finger, you've got these rings, you've got 3 bands there. So I called it the 30 rings of self-sufficiency. And what you do is gradually you build up a skill set which is going to support you. And the interesting thing about that is when you just take any one of them skill sets, right? Say, for example, firelighting, you may be going at that from 30 different directions. So, you know, not only do you could be thinking about, you could think from more modern perspectives, like having a lighter, using something like a Hudson Bay firelighting kit and how many elements are in there, right back to using something like a marcasite rock or iron pyrites or hand drill or bow drill, or there are so many different elements. So that one ring has a chandelier of another 30 elements to it. And you can do that with each one. And the beautiful term of phrase, as I understand it, is you now have 900 identifiable ways of recognizing yourself in nature. And when that is all in there, then as you stand on your own 2 feet and you move into nature, you feel like you're at home instead of you feel like a foreigner, and that's a wealth and a demonstration of self-sufficiency and self-respect. And I would charge anyone to apply that to their own life, because I think it maketh a better man, you know.
It's incredible, isn't it? Because I've lived in the countryside and worked in the countryside my entire life until moving to South Africa. And I now live, unfortunately, in Johannesburg in South Africa, which is going to change this next year. It's supposed to happen this year, but COVID got in the way. And it's very interesting for me that when I go into the African bush, how I suddenly feel like I belong. And yet in the city, I feel like an imposter. And I think that very many people feel the reverse of that, don't they? They're so habitualized to the hustle and bustle of city that when they get into nature or into the wilderness, they feel like it's not a place for them, although actually it truly is.
Yeah. But interestingly enough, a lot of people have always looked in on my life and have quite often said, hey, you're living the dream. But what they didn't realise is that I'm not just roaming around having a great time in the wilderness. It's all the elements of running a business, you know, you have to, and having a family and having a life in the 21st century. And that is a complex combination of things, anything from hoovering your floor to doing your daily upkeeps to actually, before you get the opportunity to go out there and do that, including running your business and everything. And I spent many years putting a lot of courses together, and actually all my time was consumed. It was a full 24/7 business like that. And I got to a point, I believe it was 50, and I decided when I was 50 that I was going to give myself not just one, but I was going to give myself a variety of midlife crises and enjoy them.
Purposefully.
Yeah, because I said to myself, do you know what? Midlife crisis is something that you can have and you can spend it on whatever you want for as long as you want and whatever bloody way you want. And I thought, right then, let's get started. And something had been accumulated in me, right? I wanted to give to myself the greatest gift of all. And so, and what that meant to me was to turn the books from this bookshelf into the real world. So one of the things I had planned, which COVID did get in the way of, is I was going to Russia in April. And I was going to go and visit something called the Sungir children. And not many people have heard of these, but it's actually a shock. And the reason being is because there was 2 children buried and they were adorned in mammoth ivory, beads and jewellery. And not just a little bit, I'm talking 7,000 hours worth of work on each child, right? It's an absolutely breathtaking example of something that we don't have in our modern world. There was a prevalent, you know, how can that amount of energy 30,000 years ago go into a burial.
Mm.
And here's the funny thing. So I don't know why the number 30 keeps coming up, but from the rings of self-sufficiency, I had a destination of around about 30 places to go. So one, for example, was to visit Otzi the Iceman in the Austrian Alps.
Mm.
10,000 foot up the mountain, right? I was going to climb to the spot where he was found. And for anyone who doesn't know, he was a man that was murdered 5,000 years ago, and his body was locked in ice. And he had his full clothing and toolkit, and his whole life was there. Everything from the tattoos on his body, and there was a complexity to actually be able to look back 5,000 years in time. And I would like to go and visit him, right? Mm. And I decided that when I went there, what I would do is I would not only just visit it, but I would replicate a part of his life and make a movie out of it.
Ah.
And I've begun to do this in a variety of places. So one of the places I've recently been to was the Great Orme copper mine. So in England, in North Wales, high up on this mountain, there's an ancient mine where people 3,500 years ago were mining through the limestone and getting a stone out called malachite, which is green. And what you do is you roast it and it becomes copper. So
that's just outside Llandudno, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I know where it is. Cool.
And I had the opportunity, and this is a beautiful thing, I had the opportunity to go there, dress up in my caveman clothes, mine malachite, roast the malachite and turn it into a copper axe at the Great Orme copper mine. And the interesting thing about that is not only am I only one of the very, very few people that's ever had that privilege, but I do run a course, which is a bronze casting course, right? So people come and make swords and stuff.
Mm.
And I've had to discover a lot of things about that to actually be able to put that together. Like, how does it work? What's the best way of roasting the malachite and extracting the copper from it and stuff like that, right?
Mm.
All very exciting, but do you know what? It gets to a point where there's something missing. Where did the malachite come from? You bought it online, right? That it's the direct plug-in into an actual situation. And I went there and I did that, and that's part of the tapestry inside of me now. And so when we talk about having an authority, it's about, well, you've done it, so that gives you the right to talk about it and present it to other people.
Mm.
So that was, for me, that was a very strong element of what I was doing. And then I've moved on with that science, and I went to somewhere called the Clarewell Caves, and I went many hundreds of feet down into the ground with the owner of the Clarewell Caves and literally mined ochre, which is what they painted all the caves with.
Mm.
A mined ochre from right in the belly of the earth. And when you get there, it's a bit like sitting in front of the heart of planet Earth. It's emotional.
Mm.
And then after that, I went off to this was in January of this year. I went off to northern Spain to a place called Altamira, which is just outside of Santander.
Yeah.
And I began going through all the different caves that they had that have been painted in there. And my favourite one was the Altamira cave, where you've got this huge ceiling sequence of bison and stuff like that. And firstly, I discovered that there was a lot more caves with Upper Paleolithic art in it than I'd ever was aware of. So I got a huge lesson from that.
Mm.
But I noticed something that I wasn't. This is the thing, right? You keep noticing things that you don't know are going to happen. And so one of the ways I want to describe this, right, is I wanted to get. It's not that I don't like people, but sometimes I need to get away.
Yep.
And I took myself. I drove for a day into these mountains, and then I got out of the car and I went right off into a really glorious mountain situation. And I didn't know if there was bears or anything like that, but I'm okay with the situation. And I can obviously understand what a track looks like, so you can get your bearings on what's likely and what's not to happen to you. But I got to a situation in there where I got as far as I could safely get. Now, there was a couple of elements that I needed to take on board. I hadn't planned for a survival trip. I was out there being a tourist. So I wasn't set up. I didn't have food, and I didn't have overnight equipment. I didn't have weather changing equipment. I just had me. So there came a point where it would have been dangerous to go beyond, because things can happen. And going outside is about enjoying yourself instead of killing yourself, right? So I knew that was the buffer zone. And then I thought to myself, because it was a 10-day trip, I went off, and you can tell I'm building up to something here, right?
Yep.
After I'd done that, I got in the car and I drove for a day and a half across the other side of Cantabria, which is what the province of northern Spain is called. And I got into this brand new mountain region. And it was these black mountains, snow-capped, many of them. And mountains have a bad habit of calling me to the top of them. So I spent all day getting up this mountain, and I got right to the top of it. And it was a big sense of achievement when that happens. Well, yeah, I got to the top of this mountain, and I laid down and I closed my eyes, and I was just going leveling with the sense of achievement of being there. But when I felt like I was nudged, one of my senses got nudged, and so I opened my eyes, and circling above my head were 13 huge eagles.
Wow.
They were obviously deciding whether I was food or not.
You lunch.
But there was, at first I couldn't put my finger on it, right? There was something that I was becoming acutely aware of. And this is it. I didn't know that two mountainous regions could feel like they had personality, and they were different to each other. And I actually found myself recognizing that I'd fallen in love with northern Spain. I felt accepted by the land itself. And then I came home from that trip, and obviously we started seeing all this COVID stuff going on, didn't we? And I was beginning to plan my new adventure. My new adventure was to go to. I got into prehistoric Venuses, which are figurines of very large ladies, and it was about understanding how and why they were made, and getting to grips with this actual part of the story, because again, it's part of the human story. There's over 200, there's over 200 to 300 effigies of female goddess forms. Don't get me wrong, there's male goddess forms as well, god forms, that were created. And when we talk about what they were created out of, what you're quite often seeing them made out of is either stone themselves, which is really, really, really hard, or ivory from mammoth and bone, that sort of thing. So, and you'd say, well, can you do that in today's world? Well, you can, because I found that I can actually buy ivory from places in Russia, from people who are digging it out of the ice. So I've literally, on my wrist there, this is mammoth ivory.
Well, I want to see the mammoth ivory.
Okay, yeah. That's a bracelet.
Awesome.
And one of the things I will just do, since I've got it here and we're talking about it, I'll go and get the Venus.
I'd love to see it, please.
This is Venus Willendorf, and she was found in 2009, and she's 30,000 years old.
What? That's
and I learned a hell of a lot about her. This is the one that I've just finished recreating, but on the journey, when I went to meet her in Vienna, and that was a breathtaking experience, even emotional actually. And then I went on I drove another further 160 miles into the Czech Republic, into something called the Moravian Mountains. I found a cave which I slept in, and then began searching for this stone. It's called Oolitic limestone. I found a stone and managed to make her with flint tools. I couldn't even get close to the real thing, right?
Do you think that's a time thing or a technique thing, or what do you think?
What do I think? See, after making her, one of the things I realised, because I've made 4 or 5 of her now, right? And each time I've got a little bit closer. And the reason I had to keep going is because I couldn't get it as good as the original. He had spent, I have no idea about the time scale, but he spent a lot of time studying the form of that lady and creating the curves that were necessary to get her so voluptuous. And you know what's even more interesting about it is the first few times when I looked at her, I mistakenly thought that it was just a big fat lady, but didn't really see it. You see it plump, but what you don't see is the depth and the smooth articulate and the flow of everything. This thing actually flows because it's got so much form and as texture to it. Just blew me away, and just what a journey to learn that.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It is incredible. And
do you think that we've I've, much like you, I've traveled a lot around the world over my 45 years of being here, and I've traveled a lot in India, to a lot of places, the back of beyond in India, where you can find forts and temples and even channels, water channels through mountains that date back 800, 900, 1,000, 1,500 years ago, and they're still perfectly formed, perfectly functioning today. Do you think that we've lost a lot of know-how over the years, or just become really impatient to get stuff done in unrealistic quick timeframes?
Yeah, I think the element of finance and the requirement of money has actually, it's almost been a robbery of what we're directly potentially capable of achieving. And even the ownership of land itself, it should be the land, not my land, if you understand. Because once it's the land and you're not all trying to take from everywhere, because we're all trapped in this financial chain of rotation, so it doesn't disappear. It stops us. It has a huge persuasion of taking away what we're potentially capable of, you know. And if we were able to work with what we're capable of instead of working with the limitations that we now currently find ourselves under, then I think we'd see a difference in mankind's behaviour again.
Because we know we're infinitely capable of far more than what we're actually doing today. If you just go back to Aztecs or Mayans or even ancient Egypt, and I know we're not going back to prehistoric at that point in time, but without all of today's shiny shit, those people achieved things that are mind-boggling, and so obviously we're missing something, because it would take huge amounts of manpower and cash to go and make a Mayan temple, for instance, and yet those people did it somehow thousands of years ago. It just it kind of feels like we're missing something.
Let me tell you something that I think I need to bring you home from Austria first, right?
Go. Bring me home from Austria.
We can need to come, leave Willendorf, Venus Willendorf, and we head home. And on the way home, I decided that I was going to go hunting, not for animals, but for caves. And I found a combination of different caves and had to do quite a bit of driving between them. And again, I slept in them. And I'd also done some of this in England as well. I did a West Country tour of different archaeological sites. And I just keep bumping into the same thing. I keep bumping into the personality of a place and feeling it. And it's different, and it differs from place to place. Some caves felt more welcoming than others, if you know what I mean. And some of them were noisy inside, but I'm not talking about a noise which is a noise that you can physically hear. It's a sensory noise. And some of them are much more quiet. And that, again, was something I wasn't aware that I was going to experience. And it's not something that's actually driving me away. It actually pulls you harder to keep going and to keep meeting the land. And I've come back home, obviously, and there's a future that lays ahead in front of me from what I've experienced today. So yes, there's still courses to run. Yes, there's more adventures to have. But I was sitting here and I thought to myself, there's a problem. I knew there was a problem, but I couldn't quite work out what the problem was. I have the very rare and splendid privilege of being able to run courses at Grimes Graves, but that's owned by English Heritage, you know, the place that I grew up.
Yep.
Well, the problem is with COVID, all the courses were cancelled and stopped. So I had courses and I couldn't run the courses. And I definitely can't run them really from here or at my home, because the footprint of man just demolishes the land very quickly. You know, you need to be able to move about a bit. So I spoke to one of the landowners that are on an estate near here, which is back in Breckland, which is where I grew up. And it's a piece of land which I also understand. And I've been given the opportunity to use a piece of ancient Breckland landscape, which was once quarried out, and it's wonderful because it's diverse. There's a lot going on there, right? And from the perspective of teaching primitive skills, it's perfect. And I'm going to run. So one of my new projects is I'm going to build a roundhouse.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's going to be the first thing that I do, and that is going to start in January. So it's going to be a roundhouse, and I'm going to have to teach myself how to thatch, because I've done roundhouses with skin roofs before, you know, deer skin roofs, but they don't weather very well. If they get wet and where skins touch wood, you get rot, and it's all sorts of problems with that. So I'm actually going to thatch this one. But there's, you know how if you're running a course it can be a regurgitation of the same information. And after a while, you get a bit fed up.
It feels like
And
Groundhog Day.
yeah, and I decided that I didn't want to do that, right? I can still put a good course on, and I understand that I've got some skills which are very, very much my thing, which I've honed and I've really dedicated my life to, like flint knapping.
Mm.
But with all of the courses, what you have to do is you have to bring provisions into the course to actually support what you're about to teach. So you got to bring the flint along, you've got to bring the antler along, you've got to bring the leg pads along, you've got to bring the pressure flakers, the glasses, the gloves, or whatever it is, the seats, they all have to come in. Well, there's flint in this land anyway, and there's animals on this land anyway, right? And there's a variety of forageables, and there's a variety of sharp and thorny, and it can hurt you, right? But this is the bit that I'm working towards, right? And I like this. I like this, and not just a little bit. I like it a lot. I intend to take people into the land to learn how to belong there. And the only way I'm going to do that is by not taking anything in. That means if you want to make something out of flint, well, first of all, you're going to dig the flint out of the ground. Then you're going to find something suitable to bash it with.
Yeah.
If it's not there, you're not getting it. Can you make a fire from what's there? I can make a fire. I can make a fire in many different ways, right? But it gets a whole lot trickier just to walk into the woods and make fire from what's there, because a lot of fire lighting kits have to become seasoned.
I've played the game. A few years ago, I did a bushcraft instructor's course with somebody who's got a big name in that world. And
Right.
The final day was, there's a piece of woodland, there's a knife, I'll see you in 2 hours and I want fire. That was it.
Right.
And it was probably the hardest thing I've ever failed to do.
Exactly. So why that's such an excitement, right, is because I think that what happened, so there's three things that are going to be going to achieve. One is getting a fire made. One is making some kind of tool or weapon, whatever way you describe it. And the third one is being able to get something to eat. Even to the it might just mean that you try and make fire and fail. And it might just mean that you try and hunt something and fail. But the one thing that they are not going to fail to do is feel that situation. Now, that situation causes you to ask and observe many layers of texture and what's there. And so when you put your hand against a piece of wood, what information comes off of it? The bark, the resin, the smell, the type of leaf, the type of needle, or the thorns, or the bugs, or any goddamn layer of it. It's all there. So why not try reading the book, sitting down and being gentle enough, actually to the point where it's like almost a course where not a word is spoken. Hearing, smelling, observing, watching an animal without actually desiring to kill it, and belonging there, and letting nature, because nature, when you go into it, it's a bit like you've got a spear and you're puncturing it. And what's nature going to do? It's going to recoil. And as we move into an environment, we move through a recoiled experience. And what I'm suggesting is put your spear down, let nature come back around you, and let yourself become part of nature. And if that's all that happens, And that's where I'm really with all of this at the moment.
That's awesome, Will, because
seem to have froze there.
No, I'm still here, don't worry. The ultimate part of mastery of anything does happen at a feel base. Like, you can be very factual about something, you know, here's the 10 steps to do X, to do whatever it might be. But actually the feel when you're napping of, can I chip this one more time or not? The feel of the weather, is it about to change, or how is it changing? The feel of how much pressure do you put into a bow drill when you're lighting a fire. Too much or too little can have a dramatically different outcome to the end of it. And somebody the other year said to me that a good teacher has a syllabus, but the master asks his students to go and find things that interest them and then helps them explore them further. And that was the master. And so I love what you're saying. That is, if people want to master stuff, what you're talking about is definitely the way to go about it.
Yeah. Stepping back to the beginning of lockdown, I mean, I was sort of like really sure how I was gonna. I've got through lockdown really well, actually. Things have gone well for me on particularly with social media. And I've found that there's a lot of people that have been grateful for the content that I give, because I don't mind showing a bit of my soul. You know what I mean? If I'm going to cry, I'll cry. If I'm going to laugh, I'll laugh. If I'm going to end up looking like a twat, I'll end up looking like a twat. It's fine. I couldn't give a shit, really. But they get something from it, and that's great. But in the beginning of the lockdown, I sort of thought to myself, well, you might as well. I'll tell you what you're going to do. You're going to get stuck into some of your tanning, because tanning takes a long time, and generally you don't get the opportunity to spend that time on it because you're busy in your life. So I got some skins out and I started, and I had an agenda. The agenda was I was going to make myself a backpack out of buckskin that was going to be the survival toolkit for when I go on the journeys on my new dream machine. So I got myself a nice Harley Davidson trike, right? Awesome. And 1868cc Milwaukee engine throbbing at you, and go off on this wonderful spectronic journey, you know. I thought, now that's the way to be 50, right? That's a proper dudeish midlife crisis.
That's definitely a midlife crisis.
And I thought, yeah, if you're going to have one, have a proper good one, right? Get stuck right in there with both feet. And so it began. But I needed to work on these skins. And I use a technique which isn't very, some people are using it, but it's not the most common in the world. So basically what I do is I brain tan using the brains of the deer, and I use smoke as an infusement, which is common. It's common enough in the industry, but you end up with a leather which is unique to that kind of tanning, and you can tell when you touch it. You know, your hands almost don't want to let go of it, because it's like, oh my God, that's gorgeous. You know, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've tanned a few times, and what I've learned is that, okay, so one skin's going to be the same as the next one, is it? No, it's not. It's going to listen to the language in each skin, and you'll have a journey. And it was beautiful. It was brilliant, because I got stuck into this skin, and it was called a Leicester, or a Leicester.
A Leicester? Yeah, what's that then?
It comes from South Africa, and it's like a giant red deer, but its name is a Leicester. So it's a big red deer. And there's a guy in Norfolk which breeds all different species of deer from around the world, and so he gave me that skin. So I got cracking into this, right? And let's be clear about something, right? We all have expectations, and sometimes them expectations need to get shifted, don't they?
Yeah. Usually they have to be shifted in my experience.
So bless your heart. So what I did, right, is I soaked this skin in. I grained the skin, which means that you're dragging all of the hair and the underlay tissue off. So you get down to the fabric and the epidermis from the inside. Then what you do is you sort of squidge it in the brain. And it's not about how long you leave it in the brain. It's about how deeply the brain gets to penetrate. So what you have to do is you wring the skin out, and you push that brain right into every part of the fibre. Once you've done that, basically what you've got to do is you've got to get rid of it all, and wringing it out gets rid of most, but the moisture's left behind. And then you start this stretching. And I started the stretching, and it begins to go into this transition space where it wants to go hard and become like rawhide. And you can hear it when you touch it, sort of like click, 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 it clicks and all sorts of weird noises come from it. But if you've worked hard enough, it will stay soft. And we're talking proper soft, right? And then you add smoke to it. But I was living outside anyway, right? And I wasn't in a particular hurry. So it dried out. Guess what? There was noises in it, right? Which means it's got to go back in the brain. And all the softening that you did, right? You got to do it again. And there's days work, right? The only thing is, right, is it doesn't forget what's already happened to it. Now, the interesting thing is, you go back in the brain again, you soften it, but the softening time happens quicker. Not because you've worked harder, but because it's changed. Right? Dried it out, right? Hung it in the smoke. Guess what? I've still got noises in it. It's got little hard spots. Right, back in the brain. Third time now, back in the brain, right? And then I wrung it out, and I'd never noticed it before because I've always been busy, and also been too big bloody headed to allow myself to see it because I've been in a workshop environment and expected to know better. Right? I had the opportunity where I could become the student to the skin. And it was a big skin, so it is harder to work on, right? But back in there, third time round, brained it, wrung it, and it wrung real quick this time, right? It was now becoming the environment. And then we got it hanging up in the smoke, and this time it stayed soft. And I thought, hasn't that been an interesting exercise? Because it shifted your expectations. You expected to put it into the brain, take it out, do the stretching, do the smoking, job's done. It's like, well, who are you to expect anything? Why don't you allow the skin to be your teacher, right? And stop saying that you've done enough. It's like, have we ever done enough? Because now it's a skin, right? You can keep going if you want. You can make it ever. You can go back in there. It's like it can be reconditioned. It can go back in there. It can have that new wow. And now what we're talking about is the animal's skin has got a new life, and you're part of the personality and the conjunction of all them things coming into play. And then you're stitching with the animal's tendons. Some of my clothing, I've actually taken the back strap and the legs tendons, separated them all, put them all back together, and then literally every single stitch done with a natural component from the animal. And I can't tell you the pride. And you get to the end of that, not only you haven't just made a bag, you've got something that's going to last you for life, and you've got pride in it. And when people come out, I've had people walk up to me, right, and go, when I'm dressed normally, like now, they've gone, wow, where did you get that bag? It's like, I made it. It's like, oh my God, that's gorgeous. It's like, thank you very much.
It's funny, isn't it, that one of the things that COVID has given us is, especially the lockdowns, is it's actually given us empty time. Like, as you said, when you're in a workshop with an electric light on above you, you kind of feel a pressure of time. Is the phone going to ring? Is there emails? There's all of that man-made stuff. And when you end up with no pressure of time, it's amazing how actually things slow down and take more time, but actually they actually produce much better outcomes at the end of it for us. Because I'm sure you could have made a backpack in your workshop, but I'm almost sure that you wouldn't have the same level. It would just be another backpack. It wouldn't have that level of pride or that level of softness or anything else to it, because you'd have probably rushed certain bits or failed to feel certain things. And it wouldn't have quite have got there.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it?
It's like that. I often say to people, there's that I think it's Abraham Lincoln quote, who said if he was going to chop a tree down, he'd spend 3 hours sharpening his axe and thinking about it, and then one hour actually chopping the tree down. And I think people think that if you only actively do something for an hour, that you'll only get 1 hour's worth of output, but probably of achievement. But probably if we spend more time, more care, and more attention, probably we'll get a higher quality of everything when we do actually take action at the end of it, and we'll be more mentally and physically in tune with what it is that we're doing when we stop rushing.
Well, you know, something else that actually fits into the science of all this stuff that's out in the wilderness is, and I don't like this word much, but it's called permission. So first of all, there's a very, very interesting way of looking at this. If I want to go into the woods around here, then I'm doing the most honourable thing I can do is ring up the gamekeeper and say, "Hi Mick, how you doing? I want to go down into such and such woods this afternoon. Good with that?" He has the opportunity then to say to me, "Well, actually, Will, I'll send some guns in there today." By me going in there, I'm ruining that. That can be dangerous in the first place, but also it's ruining somebody else's experience. So it's respectful for me to ask on that level. Now, we got a brand new problem. That means I go into the forest, I've got permission from a person. I never thought to ask the forest for any permission. And you could go, "Oh, that's just hippie shit." But actually, right, what my journeys have taught me is it's not just hippie shit. And I've got a good example. I've got a couple of good examples, and I'll give you one example.
Please.
I got past the permission of the gamekeeper, and I went into the forest, and there was a sort of like a juddery thing, right, going on inside of me. And I'm like, I thought, what's wrong? What is going wrong? And that got me into asking a question. And I think this question's a valuable question. I thought, "You don't feel welcome, do you?" And I thought, no, there's something not right. And I thought, okay, then we're going to explore that. So here, first of all, the term of phrases I'm going to give to you is when you have communication with people about being outside and being in nature, they quite often talk about a connection. You get a connection. Well, I want to have a little bit of a discussion about that connection, right? So we walk into the forest, right, and we get a connection. There's a bit of me going, "Do we? Where's my connection then?" And it's like, how? I demand the connection, do I? It's like, "Can I have my connection, please?" It's like this God-given demand that you can have. No way, Jose. It does not work like that. So I started, and I'm in this forest, and I thought I'd gone in there to get some sticks for arrows, right? And I thought, right, okay, I need to do something about this. I thought, so what are you going to do? Go to the big oak tree and sit under the big oak and have an oak connection? And I thought, not even bothered about that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to find a place to sit. And I'm just going to stop trying to do anything and I'm just going to be. And I sat there for a little while, right? And I was just looking, and basically got a few buzzards flying overhead, and the old rabbit moving about, and the old squirrel. And then I was looking down, right? And I went, well, bugger me. And there what I did is I picked up this little twig. It was a little rotten oak twig. Barely anything left. And it was covered in this bright green luminescent lichen. All tiny little green cups. Looked almost like been rubber and been placed on it. But it was completely vibrant, and it was completely consuming this twig. And I then got told its name was something like soup dragon, and it's like, wow, that's a really interesting name. And I sat there and I suddenly bumped into myself coming the other way. It went, that's the connection. You found a child within you. You know?
It's very interesting you talk about this, Will. When I was about 21 years old, I did a sea kayak coaching course in North Wales, on Anglesey in North Wales in the UK. And the guy running this course, on the first morning, we were about to get on the water on a beach on Anglesey, and he stopped us all and said, I just want you to sit and watch and feel for the next little while, and I'll be back, and then you can tell me what it is that you've noticed. And he disappeared. And so I sat and watched felt for about 5-10 minutes. And then I started to get really flipping angry. I'm like, I've paid to come here to learn to be like, do my British Canoe Union 5-star, training course, blah, 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 blah. It's about kayaking. It's about getting on the water. It's about this. It's about that. When he came back, it was about 45 minutes after that then. And I was fuming. To the point that I was pretty much ready to write a complaint and just disappear off the course then and there. Anyway, we fast forward about 15 to 16 years later, and I'm guiding a trip in Arctic Norway. And we don't have any phone signal. We don't have any idea what's going to happen with the weather, really. I mean, you've probably been up there. It can change relatively fast, and it was pretty damn cold. And I suddenly noticed that the top of the pine trees were suddenly flicking faster than they had been about half an hour beforehand, and that the clouds all spread out into long, thin lines up into the sky. And at that point in time, I was like, I now know what's coming next from observing and feeling what's going on about me. And it all came out of anger and frustration 15 years ago. If he hadn't have stopped me and made me stop, I probably never would have done. And I still would have been saying, I don't know, the satellite phone connection says that we're going to get this sort of weather. And actually, if you stop, feel, and engage, nature and the wilderness tells you what the weather's going to be doing next. It tells you what animals are about. It tells you what opportunities there are. But it doesn't tell you if you're too busy to miss it.
One of the things that I've learned to do, because, you can see that I'm now moving in any direction, not really sure where I'm going next kind of thing. I've kind of got a plan, but COVID has stepped on that for a period. So the plan that I'm working on is my roundhouse thing at the moment. But I've learned how to get a permission that actually is a slightly different science of the mind. Because let's say, for example, I've gone off to the Czech Republic. Well, how the hell do I find the landowner to ask for permission to sleep in the cave for the night?
So true.
So I can't, right? That's going to take a hell of a lot of research. So secondly to that, what I do is I turn up, and when I actually find a place that I want to be, I suggest to the place, and I'll say it out loud or within me, it doesn't matter, but out loud's always kind of useful. I'll just say to the place, my intention is to sleep here tonight, and I'd like your permission, right? So I'm not asking the place. I'd like permission to sleep here tonight, and if in the next half hour you show me a reason that I shouldn't, then I'll find somewhere else to stay. And I normally find that that gives me and the space an opportunity to get past that point. And once I'm past that point, then I'll put my things down and I'll settle in, because you don't want to set up and then have somebody come and move you along. It doesn't feel good. And that's just a bit of a bad quality way of actually having an outside experience, right? You know, getting moved on. Who wants that? And a lot of places, I mean, in Europe, for example, apparently it's illegal to have a fire in the woods. It's like, and camp out in the woods. It's like, well, I'm really sorry, mate, but I didn't make that law up, and I ain't living under it. I'll sleep where I damn well like, you know. And if nobody's about, even better.
But also, it's about being sensitive and respectful to all that stuff about you. It's about I don't know. I'm going to say some knots, but it's about quiet, not noise. It's about subtle, not extravagant. It's about, if you're going to have a naked flame, it's about a naked flame that's big enough to serve the purpose you need it for, as opposed to just a friggin' huge, great fire because there's an opportunity to have one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You've got to think about the roots of the trees and everything. You know, it's like you don't want to be burning the roots of the trees, and there's always I would say that there's always a cost to everything that we do, but you can minimise it, right? And you can be respectful. I know I did actually find a forest over in Wales, not Wales, down in was it? It was in North Devon. I was in, moving through North Devon, and I was getting to the point where I knew I needed to find somewhere to sleep. There was this little forest, and it was an oak forest, but it was on a bit of a point where you knew that it gets hit by wind. So the oaks weren't big; they were sort of squat and hardy like that, you know, a little bit. We're oak. And I went in, I parked up and put my bike out of the way so it couldn't be seen by the road. And I went in, and I could feel the forest going. It was very unusual to be visited, I felt. It was really unvisited. So I took the time to just say to the land, I said, it's my intention to sleep here, it's my intention to have a fire, but it's not my intention to cause any... but I felt that the forest was like that, you know, it was almost on guard. And even the point when I lit the fire, it was almost, you could almost feel the forest going, whoa! And kind of had to keep coaching the forest with, like, it's okay, I know you, and I respect you, and I'm going to treat you with respect. And also let it know when I was intending to leave, which was, and I got the permission within that forest, and I felt the permission come. Once they realised what my intention was, it calmed down. And really interesting, do you know, these are the things I never thought that I would experience. I actually have experienced them, and now it's propelling me to go on experiencing things, because it's filling in empty chambers in who I am, you know, and it's giving me the rewards of actually being alive, and I love that. Because there has to be rewards to this, right?
I think that a lot of people, whether they know it or not, have actually experienced in different places they've been to feeling welcome or feeling unwelcome, and they probably can't like put any numbers or metrics about it. It's just a weird sense that you almost can't explain. I've got a place in, I don't know if you've been there or not, but a big national park called Femensmarka on the Norwegian-Swedish border.
No,
and it's stunningly beautiful. Anyway, maybe more about that later. But there's there's some interesting places there that where I have had to stay because the weather's been so terrible. You've got no choice but to just hunker down and hide from the elements, and you just feel awkward in the location. And yet about 10 Ks away from the place I've just told you about, there's another place by a little running stream and a little pond, and it feels like home. It's in the middle of nowhere, but it just feels like you either have lived there before or you could live there for hundreds of years to come, and it would just be comfortable and happy.
Yeah.
I can't explain why. It just is.
I mean, at the end of the day, we are funny, aren't we? I watched when I was out in Spain. I was watching people climb up the sheer rock face, and mountain climbers, dead flat vertical rope work, and I was like, you ain't ever getting me up there. There are limits to what I'm prepared to do, and I know adrenaline's one thing, but sometimes people are just completely, oh my God. But all said and done, going into some of the depths of these caves, so I'm finding caves where people aren't, they're not tourist locations, and you'd be quite right to say to me, you should be careful. Bears live in caves, and I get that, I understand that, but the last particular cave I went to in Bavaria, that was actually quite scary, and there was a big chamber, and I went into this big chamber, and you go up these steps. So the steps have been put in by man, and at the back there was this chamber right at the back of this cave, and it just went, and it was all stalactites and everything in there, and I had to get on my belly and go right through. And I was like, I kept saying to myself, that's enough. And I was saying, no, it's not, you're going to the end. And it's like, what, right to the end? And it's like, yeah, mate, that's exactly where you're going. And I'm saying to myself, do you know what, mate? You are round a twist. And it's like, good, we'll just go a bit further around it, right? I get into the back there and I can hear somebody's voice. Well, I'd had some time on my own, but I can hear a voice. And I was thinking, how can I be hearing a voice? And I was scared enough of this chamber, but I came out fully expecting to see somebody else in the cave, and there wasn't anybody in the cave. So now I'm thinking, well, and I went outside, and I'm sitting down outside this big cave, and my heart's, not because of the voice, but from the cave itself, literally my heart's racing. It was really thrilling inside. And then I heard the voice again, and I looked up, and right up the top, there was a little hole that this went down into the cave, and this woman and her fella were trying to find the entrance, and she spoke through the hole, and the voice had gone into the cave. So it's just one of them funny moments, But
that's incredible. Will, you mentioned earlier about getting into the sort of ancient mindset of prehistoric people when they were doing things, and you mentioned that with regards to Venus and or the Venus and so on and so forth. What in that mindset, what do you think we can all learn from prehistoric man?
I'm going to go to what I'm familiar with instead of, I'm familiar with the goddess, right? And I've learned from him that mind, that man had a huge sense of care. I think he was compassionate about the person he was carving because of the depth that he studied into her. So that's almost like a 30,000-year-old love story.
It's incredible.
Now, secondly to that, when you flint knap, it's about making a decision. It's about making an observation, which is converted into a decision, and then it's the power of belief to do it. So when you knap flint, you don't ask a piece of stone to come off the edge. You inform and you complete that. And so what that happens next is you do that in repetition. So you're making observations, removals, attached and stitched to the next one with an outcome in sight. And what I like about it is it's the exact visual decisiveness. So what flint knapping teaches you, more than the fact that you're going to get a sharp edge, is that of coarseness. You know, it's like, I'm doing this because it works, not because I want an artifact. I need to do this. And it's like, I think observationally, right, they were clued up and they were capable. So it's about, you know, what do we describe it as? It's like insecure and unable. They weren't insecure and they weren't unable. They were self-sufficient. And interestingly enough, I'll show you a little puzzle, right?
Love to see.
So this thing here.
Oh, wow, it looks like a funny skull or something.
Well, basically what this is a reproduction, right? A direct copy. It's made in mammoth ivory, look.
Oh, wow.
Now, why have I put the pattern on there? And what is the funny shape? So there was a home, again, made in Russia. There was quite a lot of activity out in Russia. They killed the mammoth, several of, and then they butchered the mammoth, obviously. That's what they're going to do. And then what they did is they cleaned all the bones up and they began to put them in an arrangement. And then they got the skin of the mammoth, pulled it back over the top, right, and lived inside it. Because guess what? You don't kill a mammoth and take it home. No. It becomes home.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. But there's more elements to it. So with the skull is a big, interesting thing, right? And particularly if you wanted to beat it, so you could use it as a drum. Now, they had that in the entrance to the dwelling, and they carved these markings into the skull, right? And archaeology, because archaeology has a great way of actually arriving at a subject, right, and going, oh, they must have been, it represents fire. So I'm very sorry, but it doesn't, right? It represents something much more sophisticated than fire. Well, actually, fire is sophisticated, and there's another subject all there as well about element, right? But this, when you really look at it, is a configuration of lots of little dots with lots of little lines.
Yeah.
And what you can quite clearly see is there's a corral, there's a movement that goes from a round into a V section, a wedge. Now, that's the best way to hunt a mammoth, because a mammoth can't fight from behind. So if you use a valley and you run it in there, what they've done is they've kind of put the story onto the skull. And that wasn't just that. They'd then actually taken red ochre and rubbed it in. And it's like, that's incredible. It's you know, thousands of year old story. Now, this one I've got on, right? This is a reproduction. And again, you can see the markings on it, right? Interesting set of markings. This one's only 13,000 years old as the reproduction goes.
Only.
Yeah. And the archaeological quote was, they've made a pattern of a leaf on it. They have not. It's a sophisticated agreement, right? And there's a reason for this. This is just my opinion, right? And it's open to subjecture. So what I'm wearing is a reproduction of something called the star car pendant. And it was only found a few years ago, right? So star car, just keeping information on board, is, as far as England goes, when it looks back in archaeology, it kind of, we've only got certain corridors to look and find things, right? Now, in Neolithic, they were building monuments, so it all gets very easy to discover. In the Paleolithic, there's very little left of it because it's all rotted away, but we end up with hand axes and stuff, right? Which you can start typologizing and all that sort of thing, you know where they come from, and but some of them are just gorgeous. You know, if you find a hand axe 500,000 years old, you know, Boxgrove territory. But the reason why we're talking about this star car is star car's Mesolithic. Now this gets interesting because we're talking about our species, Homo sapien sapien, in an I can't say the words, sedentary, which means that we're nomadic and we're hunter-gatherers. Now there's a strategy to being a nomadic hunter-gatherer, and part of the strategy is the coastline, because the coastline's got all the shellfish and everything. The second part of the strategy is water, because we always need water, and you don't really want to try carrying water too far, as we all know it's heavy, right? And ground cover and the way things are. Now, these star car people, right, lived 3 miles. They lived a big lake basin back in its day, right? Huge lake basin, only 3 miles from the sea. So you had two strategies come together, right? And the landscape there has got a lot of peat in it. So when their stuff that they'd finished with or whatever hit the land, it was preserved.
Yes.
So what we get, we end up with the preservation of some really interesting artifacts, and some of the artifacts we're talking about were like they've cut the top of a deer's head off with the antlers on, drilled holes in it so they can put it on their own head, and a lot of people reference that as shamanic practice. Well, if you've got to hunt a deer with a bow and arrow, right, a much better way of getting nice and close to it is to wear a coat of a deer, get on your hands and knees and put some antlers on your head, and you'll find yourself getting almost up to touching distance, because the deer are seeing something they recognize, which is a very different shape to a human being. And that makes sense, right?
Well, it does, especially with the, I won't say the technology, but
yeah,
an I won't say old school bow and arrow, but I mean a bow and arrow from 1,000 or however many thousands of years ago is, yeah, you probably need to be 20 feet away if you're going to hit and kill something.
Yeah, I've got something else to bring in on this, on top of this, right? There's a problem for these people.
Which is?
It's called people. Moving the game on, you know? People are starting to recognise and see this as a place. There's over 24 known settlements on and around the area of Starkar. That's a lot of people when you're going hunting. Okay, now we don't know exactly when the settlements, whether they all coincided, but supposing they did, right? Now basically what you've got is like, what is it? Let's say 50 people around 90 acres of land. That's too much.
Mm.
And when you look at this again, what you can start seeing is you're starting to get lots of segmentation.
Mm.
And it's even numerologically divided up.
Mm-hmm.
There's even a thing that looks almost, if we turn it that way, I mean, you've got the hole here, right? That could be the lake.
Yep.
And this could be the division of land and a strategy. Because they would have been up against something, right? It's like, hey, I just seen another person over there. So and they're moving the game on. We're now starting to get hungry. They're causing, we're starting to get ownership, right?
Mm.
And ownership comes with the cost of blood. Unless it's written, there's a pun on words, right? But it's written in stone.
It's incredible, isn't it? Because I'd imagine, as with anything in the world, a precious resource, whether it's a lake 3 miles from the coast surrounded by...
Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, resources are precious. So whether it's a lake that's a few miles from the coast surrounded by forest land and whatever else and peat and resources, that's as precious then as maybe I don't know, titanium is today. If you were going to go and find a seam of titanium, it's the same level of preciousness. And then people want to protect what they found that's precious. But unfortunately, because it's precious, it just attracts more and more people to it.
Exactly. Yeah. But I mean, when did was it just our species that start acting spiritually? That's an interesting overview as well, because I mean, there was burials in Neanderthal, and I don't think there were with what we know as Homo heidelbergensis, but our species, the Homo sapien, has been demonstrating some spirituality for some considerable time now. I'll tell you a little example of one particular one, and it's undeniable because it's it's one of them situations. It's are you for real, right? So there's Grimes Graves, my story, my place, my birth, right, home. There's a pit there called Canon Greenwell's pit, and it was been dug twice. It was dug in 1860 by Canon Greenwell, and then about 1974 to 75, they redug it, right, because there were 6 chambers, which they're called galleries, where the flint was excavated from. Now, the problem is, right, it's 50 foot deep. So it's a bell-style mine that goes vertical shafts. And so 4,500 years ago, they're digging through the chalk, and I can tell you from personal experience that it's bloody hard, right? And they're getting flint as they go, but what they're going down to is they're going down through types of flint. So as the deeper you go, the older the flint becomes. And the depth that they were going down to was around about 100 million years old.
Wow.
And basically a Cretaceous seabed, which has fossilized down to become the silicate matter. Then the reason they went down that deep is because they got to a particular type of stone called floor stone. And it's like a floor. So you can have pieces of flint that are 50 foot across, right? We're talking a river that goes in 360-degree air. Can you imagine a 1,000,000-year-old coral sea reef bed? It's been there 1,000,000 odd years. And then maybe the sea retreats, so it dies, and then it comes back again, and that's where your chalk goes on, right? So you get a bit of a geology lesson from it as well. So what they did is they got all the way down to it. They had a strategy for getting the material out. Then they smashed the stone up as best they could to get it to sizes that they could pick up, and got that out. That was the floor stone they were after. And because it was so rich, then they start doing this gallery. So they end up doing these little tunnels and taken the flint as they went. And literally the whole of the site area is lacerated in, there's over 400 flint shaft mines there. And so here's the problem, right? Once you start digging a gallery, you have to get the chalk out of the way, which is rapidly filling up behind you in the bottom of the bell style mine.
Yep.
So you go down there as far as is sensibly possible from two perspectives, because you can always dig a pit next door to carry on, which is what they did.
Mm.
Right? But you've got to get that chalk back in there, right? So they took the flint out. Here, check this out, right? They took the flint out and put the chalk back so they could dig the tunnel opposite. And then they did that like radials of the sun, right?
Yeah.
But they left a few things behind. Right, and here's a couple of the things that I've seen with my own living eyes, right? Apart from, there was a burial in there. So what they had, the burial was of a dog, right? And so the skeleton of a dog was there. And beside the dog were two artifacts. One of the artifacts was this is a shocking thing that I'm about to say, in my opinion. One of the artifacts was called a Type 1 greenstone polished axe. And the Type 1, there's over 30 different types of greenstone, right?
Mm.
And this particular type comes from Cornwall, which is right across the other side of the country.
That's a long ass way away.
And next to the axe was a little skull of a bird, right? And I can't remember the name of it. It can be looked up, but this bird, during that period in the Neolithic, apparently was one of the little birds that they sort of skipper about on the sands.
Mm-hmm.
But where they would have been living is the north coast of Scotland. So you've got Land's End to John O'Groats placed together next to a dog. And then what they've done is backfilled it.
I'm sorry, I'm slightly, but those distances are a long way by 2020, right? I mean, it's a long way. If I was to say, hey, Will, can you drive to Cornwall quickly for me? You'd be like, Rob, I don't have a spare 7 hours kicking about, because it's a long way in your car or on your Harley. But back then, my goodness me.
That's a huge statement, isn't it?
It's incredible.
Now we go on a little bit, right? There's a lump of flint that's still in that mine. And as far as a flint knapper goes, like myself, that would be very desirable.
Yeah.
Because it's an amazing piece of flint. But it lays in the tunnel face down. Exactly. What the hell are you on about? It's like a human torso, a lady's torso, with the head and the shoulders. It's like a goddess. And I've turned her over, and she's got I've turned her over just to look at her, but then turned her back. But she's got an eye right in the middle of her head. And I see it as a goddess stone.
What?
It actually has a feeling to it. And I've visualized that they left her in there because of that. Many people have seen her now. And what's exciting about this particular mine shaft, by the way, is it's not open to the public. It was capped over after the last dig, and then nobody's really been in there apart from scientific researchers and stuff. And I've had the privilege of doing guided tours in there. But I'm waiting for it to be reopened before I can offer that up as an opportunity again. Now, what would you let me get you thinking like this. If I got a deer antler, and you know antlers, they can be huge, right? And I want to turn that into a digging tool, then what I've got to do is I've got to get rid of the tines. I've got to take, so that's quite a lot of work. I'm going to leave the brow tine, which is the one up near the coronet, intact, because that's going to be the point that you're digging with. And then the actual beam is going to become the handle. So all the other tines have to come off. Now you can burn antler in such a way that it makes it brittle, but it needs to be a controlled burn so that everything doesn't get destroyed in the process. Yep. In all of the mines that have been dug, and up to 300 antlers in each one. And on many occasions, there's nothing wrong with the antler.
They're fully informed, fully intact.
Yeah, some are broke, many aren't. I'm therefore suggesting that they took, here's another element, right? I think they took the flint, leaving a gift. Now, where is it on Earth that you can experience just two colours alone, black and white?
Something with marble, maybe?
The colossalness of the work. You've got a huge, visually, it's almost so bright that it's blinding to look at, the whiteness of the chalk.
Wow.
So it's almost like having a headlight particularly with the sun above it. And then you've got the blackest gloss of the floorstone. I don't know what you think, but I think that that's quite an extraordinary sight. It takes me to the killer whale.
It took me, I tell you where it took my head straight to was the, I've been to the Taj Mahal, and that's all white marble. That's when the sun reflects on it, it's almost blinding. And that's immediately where my head went to, is that's the closest I've got in experience.
So I think what we're sort of understanding really is like my experience with all of this. The past has been a spectacular teacher. And nature is being a spectacular teacher. And I'm trying to be as a reasonable student that's capable of passing some of that knowledge on. And that's what I've been doing, but I forgot something along the way. I forgot about me. So I went and I picked myself up, and I've been enjoying the journey of actually having a life and remembering that I'm included, you know, instead of being away all the time.
Otherwise you get wrapped up in this money-making, running courses, teaching stuff, and never actually get to go and enjoy where your passion is.
Yeah.
So you've got the Roundhouse coming up next, but what else is on the cards for Will Lord over the next year or 2 years? Another Ed Stafford escapade, or what's on the cards?
Well, I see the filmmaking taking me the next 10 years of my life.
Okay, wow.
So I want to film the 30 Rings of Self-Sufficiency. But because they're so big in their entirety, that each film is going to have to be broken down into parts. Because one of the unfortunate things I've found is people's screen time habit is very flick along. So they can, if they're not satisfied within the first 3 seconds, they're flicking along. And I can't say I blame them for that. But your ability to filmmake has to come up to a standard which holds people's attention and makes it an interesting journey. And that's one of the things I'm enjoying is filmmaking. You know, I've bought a variety of things to try and support myself in that, like, you know, like the little gimbals and microphones and actually even studio lighting for certain scenarios, which improves the quality of what people are going to watch. And very much like yourself, because my audience, I value my audience a lot. I think we do, and we should value our audiences, because you get loyalty from that. And I'm shown a lot of loyalty from my audience. And I think there's a few things that need to be remembered. One is the social part of social media. And the other element is the fact that we use a word called influence. And so I want my influence to be as positive and as truthful as possible. So I would actually like, as I go forward, to do some interviews of people on my timeline, so that my audience gets to hear some honest questions. And on happens, so it just happens, I'm going to be interviewing a fella in a couple of days' time, who I found as a remarkable person this year. And he basically is an ex-military, but he had something a little bit unusual. Basically, he was an undercover ops expert, and so basically he lived two steps away from death for over 7 years.
Wow.
Until it burnt him out. And he spent 3 years in recovery, and then beyond that point, he's repurposed this piece of broken land in the Chew Valley near in the direction of Glastonbury somewhere. And he's spent 8 years putting his energy into this land, sorting all the river causeway out, pulling back the bramble and planting the right species of things, and carried a log cabin all the way in and built that, and now operates from within this to help other expats and certain client bases. And it's a story of somebody who has gone to hell and back, literally, with a ginormous set of bulls, really, and has found the power to get back out of his own hellhole that he was left with, and recover himself to make something positive of an environment. And I just see that nature has helped him, and he's helped it back. And that's a beautiful story. And, there's certain things about that I'd like to be able to present to my much loved social media following, really. We can get negative sometimes because, people can be a bit ill-spoken on social media, but I've learned very quickly how to deal with that. I basically don't bother. They're not who I'm there for. So I don't worry about it,
I have a little rule that if ever I've consumed anything alcoholic, I'm not allowed to touch social media, because my temptation to go and comment back when somebody puts something crap on there gets higher. The bit high, if I'm on my third whiskey, the temptation to go and say "F you" or "Who do you think you are" or any of the above sort of gets.
I hear you, but I actually did a couple. I decided to. I haven't done it much, but a couple of times I decided that I would. I totally get where you come from. Once the first drink's down the hatch, leave the bloody thing alone, right? But I thought, everyone's on lockdown. Nobody's really having a great time at the moment. So why don't you open the door and let them in? And I got as pissed as a fart in my tent out there, right? On a Facebook Live. And fortunately, it went very well. And I said to them, there's 3 things that are going to go on in here tonight. I said, I'm going to get pissed, I'm going to smoke, and I'm going to swear. So as long as you're informed, I said, you're welcome to join me if you'd like. And that's what I did. I just let my hair down. That's quite good fun.
Yeah, that's all right, because you didn't have a negative comment in front of you to go and go at or anything like that. You could just be you.
Yeah, nobody was actually. I'll tell you what, people were just so happy just to sort of like experience somebody having a laugh in such difficult times. And I don't think if I was having a laugh, I wouldn't bother doing all this, but I am having a good laugh and I feel good. You know, I feel good in the right place. So.
Well, then carry on doing what you're doing. Will, as we come towards the end of our time together, if people want to come and learn from you, hang out with you, where's the best places for them to come and find you, contact you and everything else?
I have a website called will-lord.co.uk, obviously with 3 W's. And on there, on the actual front page of the will-lord.co.uk website, there's a landing page, and there's 3 buttons right in the middle. So you've got your home page and 3 buttons. One is an Instagram link, one's a YouTube link, and one is a Facebook link. So you could actually go at me from 4 different directions. There's lots of films that I've got on YouTube. There's over 2,000 pictures of the things that I've been doing on Instagram, and there's a live viewership of the stuff that I get up to on Facebook. So each platform has something slightly different to operate, and there's courses there as well. And I do sell some of the stuff that I make. In fact, I sell pretty much all of it, but I'm not sitting here manufacturing artifacts for sale as a way of a living. So sometimes there's less there to buy, and sometimes there's a bit that comes up, and that's kind of, and it's nice for me because I know it's going to sell. I just sort of cracking along like that, really.
Awesome.
And enjoying it. Yeah.
Cool. Well, listen, Will, thank you for your time today, and thank you so much for allowing us to have a deep dive into the mindset of people who lived 30,000 years ago, and how quite possibly they were remarkably similar, yet remarkably different to how we all live our lives today. I think there's a lot to be learned in each direction, whether we're learning from the past or learning from the present. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Would you do me a favor? When you've got your roundhouse built, can we find a way of doing another interview in and around the roundhouse on your phone or something? Because I think that would be just a short one. I think that would be absolutely epic.
I'd love that. And just to finalise, this morning I had a vision of being inside it, and I didn't want to leave. It was beautiful, and so I have a duty bound by a vision now. And you'd be most welcome to have an interview in there.
Awesome. That would be fantastic. And when COVID comes, maybe I'll come and see it in person when I come back to the UK. That would be incredible.
Well, thanks for having me along, and all the best to all the viewers. I hope it's been exciting and entertaining. And yeah, there's a little look into my world.
Thank you. What a great world it is. Folks, please go and reach out to Will. Follow him on all his social media platforms. All the links are below. Check him out on his website, and make the time and the effort to go and spend some time with the man, because I feel like I want to spend more time with him now, and it's only been a couple of hours. I think all of you will get addicted to the Will Lord experience at some point in time. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Cheers.